Shri, just let me know if you could see my share document. Uh-oh, nope, not this one. Sorry, my bad. All right, again, I'll try one more time. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it, Rafi.
All right. Let's start with what we know about AI. There's predictive AI and there is generative AI. Predictive AI predicts future events based on historical data. With that comes its own complexity. They're complex algorithm, but yet, the complexity in terms of explainability, transparency, interpretability, and then also what comes with it. These types of models are super super important in detecting treatment effects in data. You have.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Would you mind making the slide full screen?
Will do. Will do. Can you see it now?
Yes. I think you can switch between monitors because I think we are seeing your presenter view.
All right.
If you could just click on the, I think there should be a switch display settings, I believe, on the top. In the display setting in the middle on the top between show taskbar display settings. I think there should be like swap. Yeah, if you can click the.
Can you see it now?
It's loading. It's perfect. Thank you.
All right. I'm learning. So basically, with the data, these algorithms are very good in detecting treatment effects in data. What do I mean by treatment effects? Treatment effects like you have good collector in the back end in the bank that do collection activity, recovery activity after you book a loan, and you have those in the back end. Good collectors. The treatment effects could be change in policies, things that happen in the portfolio management. And again, these treatment effects are within the data. You build the model, it captures all of the treatment effects. And having these treatment effects, the models are super powerful in giving you a lift in terms of predicting events. And then at the same time, that comes with its own challenges like data drift, concept drift, environmental shift. And what do I mean by environmental shift? Is change of policies, things that happen in the model. So you have deterioration in the model on your ongoing performance monitoring. And with that comes issues with algorithm bias and all the 9 yards. Now, when we're talking about generative AI creates new content based on learned patterns. And again, as you can see on my screen, what's at stake here? These types of models could make, the stakes are making things up, suggesting bad action, improper handling of sensitive data. So those are the things that we should be paying attention to and factor all of that in the model life cycle when we're looking at generative AI. So on the key challenges, I call one of the key challenges, I call runaway models. That is linked to the new model owner. What do I mean by runaway models? SR 11.7 happened after 2008, 2009 crisis. So we learned a lot since the beginning of the crisis till where we are today. We have model owners that are very familiar with regulatory guidance, very familiar with model risk management policies, procedures, and standards. So basically, they understand all the culture of model risk. And here, in the traditional types of model, the predictive AI type of models, we have very little runaway models. Where you see runaway models are AI embedded in a vendor solution, a third-party vendor. So runaway model, it becomes a bigger issue when we're dealing with Gen AI. New model owners, if you're in model risk management, writing a job description was never, a job description was never part of model risk management. We don't have it in the inventory job description model. It's not a model. But today, using ChatGPT or Copilot to come up with a job description, it's a model. So you have a different model owner that never used to model risk management or the SR 11.7 or the OCC bulletin related to guidance on model risk. So you have these new model owners require a lot of attention, and these are a certain group of individuals need training. All of that comes, these are the key challenges. Zero shot application, and Shri, this is what our friend Agus, and again, I learn a lot from him. He's, we keep learning from him. He is never going to retire. So when you look at something called a zero-shot application, is using the large language model like GPT without training these models on the specific data that you need to the intended use of these models. So that is something that at stake here. Initial controls, the traditional models, predictive AI, we usually, you build the model, we validate the model, and then we look at the controls, the end use of the model. In this particular case, when it comes to generative AI, the initial controls are super important at the time of the model inception. This is when we are trying to understand, is this a model, a tool, or an expert judgment, or a non-model? The initial controls are super important, that the model owner comes to model risk management with the controls up front before you talk to me about the model. Criteria, what's in scope versus out of scope. So if we don't do this correctly, I have to double and triple the size of model risk management, because using the generative AI and looking at large language model across the bank will be so significant. And the question is, when you look at SR 11.7, it's always a risk-based approach. We have tiering. The tiering helps you to manage your capacity, your efficiency, and manage the models in terms of a risk base. The higher risk you are, the more frequency of the ongoing performance monitoring, the more scrutiny that is needed based on the validation, the documentation, the quality, and so on. So it's no different than the scope. The scope here, your inventory is going to double and triple. It's going to exponentially go through the roof, and you definitely need to understand the criteria, what's in scope versus out of scope. And here I give credit to Agus. He started this discussion 2-3 years ago, and he's talking about inherent risk. I'll get to it. It's on one of the slides. But definitely, this is something that you need to pay attention to. And then when you're dealing with these types of model, the validation, it's not the typical validation that you're accustomed to. Yes, you're going to use your experience, your practicing, your sniff, everything. But this requires a lot of training. Your validation report needs to be enhanced to address many things like prompt creativity, contextual understanding, evaluation of the prompt, performance of the output that comes out of it, the synthetic data, the quality that you use to do the testing and sensitivity of these types of models. So again, these are the challenges. How are we going to address these challenges? You can't do this alone as a model risk management. If you have the team to do it, you could do it. But again, there will be gaps. So having an AI governance working group is super important, because you have partners across the bank that will be part of the working group. And again, it's us, model risk, compliance, enterprise risk, IT risk, third-party risk management, legal, and sometimes we bring in the business at the end of the process or in between when we're trying to identify if it's a model, not a model. Again, this AI working group think of model risk management as, you're sitting at the end of the funnel. So the effective challenge or the inception or understanding what's coming in through the pipelines go through this group. And you're sitting with the group and you're, again, looking at the scope criteria and trying to understand, given the initial controls, given the, what's the inherent risk, looking at the use and usages of this particular generative AI, you can decide if this is a model, and if it's in scope. They're all models, but if it's in scope or out of scope. So if it's in scope, it follows the model life cycle. If it's out of scope, definitely other groups are going to be engaged. The controls and managing the life cycle of this particular tool's application, whatever we put it, scope it out. There will be different groups making sure that there's governance around it. The exemption criteria, again, as I said, I'll talk about it in a second. I'll bring the two dimension, the inherent risk, again, building on a goose idea of the use and usages, but overlaying it with controls. The override of what's in scope, we definitely know what's in scope and out of scope. The out of scope, it's very easy to see. This is what a goose had. And in scope, we know definitely what's going to be in scope. But in between the out of scope and in scope, there's a gray area. The gray area is dictated by the controls, the initial controls. Heavily involvement of human in the loop. The type of algorithm is used is very well known in the industry, and so on and so on. I'll get to it in a second. But then again, you have to rely heavily on your framework and policies when you are tailoring the generative AI. So when you look at the model life cycle, is you start with inception and tiering, and then you go to model development, and then the development comes the validation. After the validation, implementation. After the implementation is the monitoring, and then change management. Things happen in production. Model deteriorates. You have to bring the car back to the garage for fixing. So what is constitute change management versus what I call changes to the model that are significant, that requires model risk to be part of the effective challenge, and making sure that you don't do those changes in production without calling model risk to the picture. So if you look at predictive AI, there is lock models and unlock models. Lock models meaning you validate the model, you put it in production, and you monitor the model. If any changes happen to the model, you deterioration, data drift, concept drift, model drift, you bring it back, you fix it. You require, if it's significant changes, and we have to lay out what significant changes mean. We will determine that this should be part of model risk effective challenge. So this will change-based validation. We validate the model, and something called automated or the model upgrade itself instantaneously without having a human in the loop. We don't allow that for models that are used in decisioning, like underwriting scorecard. But in marketing, in certain areas, we allow something. You look at risk-based approach and what is the impact of using new data in marketing. How is that? Is there any compliance impact, and so on and so on? You'll see it across the industry. But again, change management is super important. When you look at the risk tiering, in today's environment that we work on, the traditional type of model, predictive AI, and traditional classical regression, logistic, whatever model you use in statistical model, we look, basically there are 3 dimensions. Sometimes it's 4, but majority is around 3 dimensions, which is the significance, reliance, and uncertainty. Those are super important, but those doesn't have the flavor of what generative AI. So we need to bring the flavors of generative AI in the risk theory and making sure that they map. There's some mapping between the significance, reliance, and uncertainty of these models, and bring in the special flavor of generative AI. And then the template, as I said, you definitely need to go back to the validation template and address metric. The types of metric that you need. I'll walk you through that in a very. I have one slide on this. So I stop here and see if there's any questions. Shri is at the end, correct? Is that right?
I don't think there are any questions at this point, Rafiq, but so maybe I can just have a question in here. You
Yes.
mentioned this, AI working group. Now, Staff, who was a speaker at our a couple of weeks ago, so he and we had been discussing a few, probably last year, about this notion of kind of a triaging group. Because you have multiple stakeholders, especially when you have, your data governance, your model governance, you have your audit, you have an end users, and all these, people who have multiple perspectives, as you mentioned in here. Now, have you structured this within your organization, and how has the dynamics been in terms of both responsibility and also their ability to kind of understand multiple paradigms and then see who should own that part of the vetting, if you will, before you can establish as a workflow? Because ultimately a model needs to go into production, and how do you kind of decide who's going to be signing off, saying that, okay, fine, we have done the vetting and this is ready to go, kind of a thing. So how is this group structured? Is it primarily an advisory group which advises the model risk management team on what they should be doing, or do they own certain responsibility in terms of vetting and things like that?
No, we work together in identifying the book of work, what's coming in through the pipeline. So basically, let's say we want to use Copilot for, using it for job description. That comes through the pipeline. We all look at it from IT risk, enterprise risk, data management, model risk management. And this is where, it's a model, because you're using a large language model to write a job description. And again, we all agree, and we definitely need, if you're in HR and you're writing a job description, the controls. You're using ChatGPT or Copilot to make you superhuman. It's a catalyst. But again, you're coming up with great content by using ChatGPT and large language model. You're becoming super HR. Okay, let's put it this way. But again, the process that you did is no different than what you did in the past. You definitely need to follow your internal policies, making sure there's no bias. That this is fit for external. You're following the same processes like you did in the past, but you're just using the ChatGPT as a catalyst, as superhuman for efficiency. I can go on and on. Yeah. So in that group, that's where the discussion happened. What are the controls? Who have access? Who doesn't have access? The access levels for the posting. Are you following your policies? Are you doing X, Y, and Z? So that's why I said we're at the end of the funnel. It goes through all these effective, and then we will say, the final say, if it's in scope versus out of scope. So if it's out of scope, then somebody in that group are responsible for the controls and making sure that it follows the process, the current process that they have based on their policies, how to post a job description. So the group works together, bringing their own expertise. So the learning that we have from model risk, we share with them, but definitely model risk, policies, procedures, standard is owned by us. And we're there to facilitate with the group how to understand the complexity, of these, and then how do we communicate with the mal owner? The mal owner never been in our database. He's not part of the attestation of the inventory. He's not aware of, SR 11.7. Have no idea. This is where all that fabrication, everything that is needed, that group helps to facilitate the process.
Got it. I may have a couple of additional questions in here. because it's very contextual. And this is something I've heard from a lot of companies who I work with. The first one being, how big is your model inventory? Now that everybody has, access to, let's say, ChatGPT, you mentioned runaway models, right? So would you consider, someone who wants to accelerate the typing of their job description or an email and leveraging ChatGPT, even if it's the free version, usage of a model, and would that be considered as a use case for the model inventory? That's one question. The other question is, I mean, with the proliferation of AI-based tools, not just as interfaces like chatbots, like ChatGPT, but also vendor tools, right? So, you have a lot of vendors actually using AI tools to,
That's
bring more data and
that's
stuff
why,
like that. Yeah.
that's why the third-party risk management is part of the discussion. Is flagging, before you go out to a vendor, there
Mhm.
are set of questionnaires, set of flags that we absolutely need to know, and definitely flagging those prior to bringing in a vendor is super important. That is the importance of the working group.
Got it.
and
Got it.
and and making the runaway models less because it's hidden. So
Mhm.
you're using, let's say, a vendor that is doing collection, some collection strategy, inbound, outbound calls, and you're using that to who to call first. You rank order accounts. You're using something in there. It could be a simple strategy, but in that strategy is embedded Gen AI. We
Got it.
definitely need to understand the embedded Gen AI and or an AI in general. So that's where these learning and understanding and talking to each other as a group helps the people across, looking at the pipeline, looking at all the vendors that you're working with and the projects you're dealing with. Have we identified any AI, Gen AI risk
Mhm.
included, embedded in these models? That is where the efficiency of the working group. If you're standalone model risk management doing that, you'll get a lot of runaway models.
Mhm.
You will get there will be issues that you cannot control because you're not at the inception. You're not as a part of the funnel. So having that group is it's the entire organization working together. So
Cool.
that's that. I don't know if I answered that, and then you
Absolutely.
asked something
I mean, I
about
think it covers, many of the things which I've been hearing, and obviously we got to go use case specific and kind of, go into the details of all the other
yes.
things. Right? But I think the
So
spirit of the model, the working group, I kind of, get it. Yeah.
I will this is the generative AI model life cycle. I would just focus on a couple just to show you the gray area.
Perfect. Yeah.
You're looking at identification and tiering. This is where you're part of the working group. If it's a potential model assessment, we have a potential model assessment form. We need to understand if this is a model, a tool, expert judgment, or a non-model. Here is the place where we use our expertise in doing this. Here we want to know also the initial controls. We need to understand what comes with the model. What are the controls that you're going to have when you're using this model? And then we look at the scope criteria. After we see the scope criteria, if it's in scope, we definitely need to do the tiering on it because we need to manage these models and having a tiering, because in model risk management, usually you have tier 1 to tier 4, you have KRIs, the non-risk indicators that you basically want to make sure that you do your tiering appropriately for many things. One is capacity, efficiency in managing the model life cycle. Not all models are equal. Yes, they're risky, but there's ones more risky than the others. You look at the inherent risk of your organization, because when you look at the aggregate model risk, part of the component of your aggregate model risk is the inherent risk. Having the risk tiering distribution is part of your inherent risk. Part of your inherent risk, identifying the number of models that are AI, Gen AI. It could, at the beginning it was AI, now we have AI, Gen AI. What percentage of these models? Today, people are moving away from the classical to AI, Gen AI. So that is the inherent risk becomes super higher than the traditional model. How many of those are vendor? You're going to be that inherent risk is going to go through the roof if you're if you're farming out most of these models, getting vendor models. So the tiering is super important, identifying it and understanding it, and having attributes in your model inventory that attributes to the generative AI is super important for management, the heat map, understanding, the model life cycle, understanding, when you're pulling information from your inventory, how you factor that into your aggregate model risk. So you can see identification and tiering is super important. That's through the funnel. And then you have the development. These are important information that the developer must do before submitting models to us. And then this is our validation. When you look at the validation, so basically you have to enhance your validation template. And that validation template, we all do performance testing. We all do how robust is the evaluation of the model. But there are metrics that we're not used to in the traditional, looking at quality and safety metric when it comes to Gen AI. When you're looking at the intended use of these models, the quantitative and qualitative metric, the combination of the two, like you do in a predictive, and then you look at qualitative. And these are the challenges, again, for quant, when you're using qualitative metric to evaluate the model. So the subject matter expertise is super important in an area probably your model risk management team members is not familiar with. So again, these are the challenges. These are the gray area, the prompt creativity and context. How do you do that? How do you test for it? That is something that requires a lot of training, a lot of understanding and subject matter expertise. And then again, implementation, it's no different than everything else. And then the monitoring. Monitoring is super important to make sure that you have a loop on your monitoring. A traditional model, if it's a tier 1, the frequency of monitoring might change based on the uncertainty and the risk tiering. Change management, you want to make sure that you understand the changes. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of having a generative AI. So the question is, when do you come in to do change-based validation, when it's not required? Those are the things at a very high level. I know we have 1 hour, I can't go in detail, but it just captures the essence of what generative AI should be. And this, I'm just going to flash this. I have it on LinkedIn. So when you're looking at tiering, tier 1 to tier 4, and the traditional significance, reliance, uncertainty, you want to have some of the flavor of your generative AI in determining the riskiness, the tiering of it. So high risk, you could say, I laid it all out. You want to bring some of the confabulation, making things up, the data privacy in there, and compare it to the significance and reliance. Have that one-to-one relationship that you're consistent with the predictive AI and the traditional types of model, and what types of threshold that you need. So you'll have time to read through it, but it's no different from the risk tiering that we're doing, but having the flavor of generative AI in it. Criteria. This is where, and I'll spend some time here to show you some examples of what's in scope versus out of scope. And again, Agus started the thinking about what's the inherent risk of Gen AI. The inherent risk is the user and usages of this model. So how we look at inherent risk, it's a 4x4 metric. You could see in there the combination of use and usages determines what's in scope versus out of scope. So if you look at the top two, these are out of scope, and you look at in scope, the lower end of the metric. You could see that. Okay, sorry. So again, as you can see, I'll give you one example of out of scope. Non-generative classification, and somebody who super expert in either software engineer or data scientist that is using these two combinations. This is just one example. It's out of scope. Now, if you look at technical expert and then you look at general open text generation, this is like the writing a job description. I'm talking about the one in red here. Okay, if the job description is not following the policies that they follow in the past, there's no human in the loop at every level of the process, this will be in scope, and we'll call it a tier 2 because it has an impact on, it generates content, and we definitely need to understand that there's some bias that could be in there if there's no human in the loop. So you can see the in scope and then get override if you have controls that mimic of what you've been doing in the past, and requires significant human in the loop, significant approval process before you go and post the job description. As you can see here, this is the inherent risk. It's systematic, it's consistent. We want to use it. Always there's a gray area. The question is, how do you justify putting something out of scope? It has to be heavily documented, evidence and trail of the controls that are in place will allow you to do that. And it's based on what, if you look at the use and usages, each of these cells has its own flavor of how you can override it. But there are ones that you cannot override. We call them in scope, and you can see the tiering associated with that. Okay. Let me jump into the in scope. If it's in scope, these are requirements that is needed. And if it's, I call it override controls, this is where you can use some of the overrides when it's in scope, but you have those controls in place. You can override the in scope given it's a sandbox environment, the automated output with human review, step by step. It's a non-public facing model. Having those, you're not cherry picking, you're using controls that you verify at the time of inception when you're determining if it's a model or not a model, and then determining if it's in scope or if it's out of scope. And then this is the validation template. These are the things that I would like my validation template to have. Quality metric, safety metric when it comes to clear metric, contextual evaluation. I would like, in the validation template to have that, a combination between quantitative metric and qualitative metric, and methods to determine the method combining those two help to understand the complexity of the model. And again, when it comes to the qualitative component of it, it requires expert review. And again, you rely heavily on the model owner or the line of business or the area that this particular Gen AI or large language model is being used. So these are the things that we would like to have in our validation template, enhancement to the current validation template that we are using. And then anytime the model risk management pre-submission to us, these are the things that we definitely, it's kind of like a checklist we want the model owner to do. Bias in testing, it's a must for the compliance and the fair lending team to have. We just want to know, we want to make sure, and again, we want to make sure that the model is fit to use from the compliance and bias testing. A different group is in charge of, from bank to bank, it varies, but you need that bias testing, making sure that you're ethically using these types of models. So I think this is it. I'll stop here and see if I'll give more. 1 second. There you go.
Cool. Thank you so much, Rafik. This was what they call as a power-packed information session. So we'll share the slides with everybody so they can review individual pieces.
I know it's very limited. You're talking about complex I mean, it's not complex in the sense that it's no different than any models that we're dealing with, but it has its own flavor.
Right,
It's
right.
kind of like learning a new language, like you speak fluent, English, and then all of a sudden now you're trying to learn French. There are some commonality, but maybe it's a wrong, wrong
Yeah.
example.
Yeah,
But
like
there's some.
it's very much contextual, right? Because I mean, one good news is like most of the people in this audience have the context and they're already facing some of the challenges you discussed. So there is already that context piece wherein people have some experience on dealing with these kinds of questions. But maybe we can ask a couple of questions. So I want to ask the first question, which Agus had I think you had mentioned in one of your LinkedIn posts, and I think. For people who don't know, Agus gave the first lecture in the fall AI school, and he has a wonderful lecture which is recorded and available on Quant University's website. But in addition to that, he's also hosting a full-day workshop on Thursday, I believe, at H2O in New York. So I don't know, I may see some of you in the model risk community there. If you need information, please direct message me, and I'll see if I can connect you with Agus's team to see if they can share more information on that. Now, a couple of questions, Rafiq. One was brought up by Agus. Now, many of these models, I mean, we have this whole pipeline we used to build, right? Like training, testing, validation, and kind of making sure everything worked before back testing and all that fun stuff we were doing. Now, as you were mentioning, you put in the job description title, no context, gives you a fabulous answer, which needs vetting, obviously, but it looks super cool. So how do we, look at conceptual soundness when we talk about zero-shot models, wherein you do not have any kind of ground truth or any kind of training data to even align the model to what you're looking for? And what does it mean from a conceptual soundness perspective from the use cases you have seen, and how do you deal with it?
Again, it's like any other model. If you're using, let me give you a simple example on this. You build a model to do auto decisioning, for auto finance. And again, you take that model and you use it for commercial risk. Doesn't work. Think of it this way. The intended use of the model was for auto finance, and now you're using for something where the model domain expertise, everything that you factor into the model is not the same. It's no different than what Agus is saying is, again, you're going to go back to the basics of SR 11.7, which is the conceptual soundness of the model, is the data that fed into the model. It's the algorithm that is used, the output that comes out of the intended use of this model. As you could see, when I looked at the model life cycle, that conceptual soundness have to be in every component, from the development to the validation, the monitoring. Any changes in the intended use of the model has to be checked and flagged, and then it goes back and say, hey, this model is not performing the way we wanted it to be. And then again, you definitely need that domain expertise when you're doing this, especially when it comes to generative AI. Is how do you fine tune? How do you test? Like again, as I say, you have a metric, safety metric, and you have fine tuning metric. You need to do, in the absence of controls, initial controls, and policies that you're following. So in the case of the job description. So if we're doing the job description example, if you're not following your internal policy and you're using ChatGPT, and there were, for some reason, the job description is targeting only green aliens, okay? So that is a reputational risk. It's a compliance issue, ethical issue. I can go on and on. So definitely by not following this is where the criteria, if it's out of scope, it doesn't mean you're off the hook. It means that you need to follow your, HR policies and IT risk, and like anything that you post on, on behalf of the bank, follow certain protocol and controls that is needed. That is the danger. I call it new model owners, runaway models. So definitely you need to again, going back to SR 11.7, you're not doing anything different than what you learned in the past couple of years, is to apply all the common sense that you learned from SR 11.7. And I give you a simple example: auto finance using personal loan. It doesn't work. Auto finance, there's collateral. Personal loan, there's no collateral. I mean, it's a whole different ball game, and it will create financial and many other issues for you.
Got it. Got it. So I have a couple of other questions which people are asking. So I'm going to see if I can maybe consolidate some of them and then
Yes.
ask.
And again, everything I say, it's me, not the third.
Yeah, I think
It's a great area, and we're learning from each other. Absolutely.
Obviously. So this is something I've been pondering too when we talk about building model inventories and building out how do we structure these use cases, auto loans, other kinds of instruments. And now the mothership is the same, it's this large language model with all these aspects is the same. So I think Huang Li kind of asked this question, but are you going to treat each use case and the appropriate use of this model as one of the models, or do you consider just the large language model, which is underlying, making all the decisions as a model? So how do you kind of, do your tiering and also your placement of what is considered as a model?
Again, when you're using large language model, it is a model. There's no if and then. It is a model. The question is, we identified as a model, and this is where the regulators wants to know: when we do inventory attestation, we want to make sure no models in production that we're not aware of. In this particular case, and then that's what we do. We've been doing this for many, many years, is catching models and then give an exception and then say, hey, you violated, send it back to us. So we do the validation. So every model in production has been validated, went through model risk management. Here, what we're saying is we'll follow the same process for all of this. We do attestation, we do ongoing performance monitoring in between the initial validation and the annual review. In between those two periods, the frequency of that ongoing monitoring, if you do it 2-3 times a year, we need to be aware of your frequency. We need to know if the model is performing as expected. We don't want to wait for the annual review because of the complexity of these types of models. So we can fail a model immediately if we see the model is not performing. It could be a traditional, gen and non-gen, and so on. The reason why we have this working group is to identify all models. These are models in scope versus out of scope, and we have a different inventory. Different banks will contain all of them together. It varies from bank to bank, but the inventory is there. So if you are a senior management and you want to know how many models do we have, we could say these are the entire AI. We can combine the two inventory. We say this is what's in scope, this is what's out of scope, and who's in control and how we manage them. So there's management of that. You need to have a complete understanding of everything that is being used in production that is AI, Gen AI. Even today, when we look at expert judgment model, these are not traditional statistical model, qualitative model. We definitely need to have them in the inventory because of the uncertainty that comes with it. And these are used. It could be an embedded model within the model, expert judgment model within the model. Like you have a PD model, but LGD, you can't build the model, you don't have the data. You come with a qualitative LGD using LTV. It's one example. That LGD model will be in the inventory because there's an uncertainty that comes with it, and it can create upstream, downstream impact. So we need to be aware of it. Tools, it depends on the types of tools. If the T1 tools, that is where the inventory, again, SL 11.7, it doesn't say that model risks have to do everything. It just says that there is an effective challenge independent of the model owner is doing something similar to what model risk. And different companies do differently. But again, we want to make sure that a risk-based and something that we want to make sure that we have the model life cycle, the ongoing monitoring, any change base happening, the uncertainty base model. We want to have a closer look and keep it within the important models that we look for.
Perfect, perfect. So coming back to this notion of effective challenge, I think there's a question by, I think it's Mikhail Hunter. I'm going to just maybe paraphrase that question. Michael,
Oh,
okay. So this notion of effective challenge, when it comes down to like third-party model validation or like, maybe vendor models, in the Gen AI side of things, have you been looking at primarily, like what the vendor says this, vendor has attested this, vendor has provided this documentation, or do you have, specific things you as MRM kind of enforce a common standard for all vendors? They don't clear this thing, we're not going to even let them in, kind of a thing.
It's a checklist. Before you go to your vendor, the vendor is not immune from model risk management. I mean, if you're selling a product, you're selling it to different banks, not only to my bank. They understand the prerequisite of what is required from model risk management to submit a model. Now, yes, the secret sauce. The secret sauce, you're not going to tell me what's your secret sauce, because you definitely, this is disadvantage of telling me what's your secret sauce. But definitely, there are things that you need to do to show how robust is your model, how compliant is your model, how the sensitivity of your model. Is your model, the ongoing metric, the ongoing performance metric. All of that can be a prerequisite to putting the vendor on board. This is where the working group work together in making sure you don't bring somebody, and all of a sudden we can't put the model in production. We can't do that documentation. These are things that we've been facing since 2008 until today. We went through a journey where both vendors and the people who are using vendors understand the prerequisite. There's a checklist of things that we required prior to submission.
Right. Good.
On the vendor.
Now, and maybe this is something, I think we are at 105. Thanks for staying a little bit over, Rafiq. So I'm going to maybe even qualify this question. I think you gave a lot of examples on different kinds of aspects. Now, this is something, and maybe it's an opportunity for us to collaborate also, because many of the use cases which most of the banks deal with are similar. And if we are looking at generative AI, I mean, maybe the specifics may be varied a little bit here and there, but in generality, someone trying to reach, what do you call it?
What happened, bank hacks happened. That's why we have roundtable. We have something like what we're doing today. We learn from each other, definitely.
Exactly,
yes.
Right? So when it comes down to model tiering, I think there is an opportunity to kind of at least take like the 80%. They also, the 80-20 rule always works, right? So the 80% of the use cases probably in all banks are probably leveraging generative AI or other tools are going to be the same. Probably 20%, someone's doing something very unique and differentiated, which they want to keep it for themselves. But the model tiering, sometimes people get confused, like, oh, this is a super risk model versus, I don't think it's as risky as you thought. Yes. So maybe there is an opportunity to kind of collaborate and put together and allow to see if people want to collaborate to create a white paper. And talking about some of these common issues. So if people in the audience want to collaborate, please send us a note. I'd love to see if we can create maybe a list of here are some use cases, community developed. Here is what we can say as tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 kind of a thing. But then people can also debate. And then at least we can really, kind of have some consensus that these are the reasons why we should be tiering these models at a particular layer.
You're spot on.
That. Yeah.
You're spot on. And this is where I said the gray area. You're spot on. So if you go back in history, when we were dealing with regulatory model like CECL and CCAR, let's start with CCAR. Everything was tier 1. It doesn't matter what it is. It was tier PPNR model, a simple model. It is a tier 1. We learn a lot since then how to manage the tiering. And again, in this area, there's a lot of gray area. So again, if you don't do it correctly, if you tighten your tiering, you have the inherent risk. You're going to skew all your models to a tier 1 model, correct? And if you make it too loose, you put everything in the lower tiering, and that's not good. So it's a balance in how you do it, because that is also going to impact your KRI. That is going to impact everything else that you are monitoring the model risk management. So when you look at aggregate model risk, you look at inherent risk. If now all of a sudden all you have a tiering distribution that is not skewed to tier one, let's say, and all of a sudden everything now is a tier one, you have a skewed in your tier one distribution, that's going to have an impact. If you look at your KRI is a denominator of all tier one and tier two model, and in the numerator exception. Models in production never been validated. If you put too many tier one and tier two, that KRI becomes inefficient because you're not doing it correctly. It has a huge impact on how you manage the risk. So doing it correctly and making sure that's why I say, you have to map it back to your tiering. You cannot look at it without looking at your significant reliance and uncertainty. That's why you have a column for what, and then how you match or you map it to the current tiering that you're having. Because if you don't do it correctly, you're in trouble. You're creating a lot of noise that is unnecessary. So that's why the tiering, I'm glad that you brought it up. That's one of my worries. It's super important to do this. If you don't do it correctly, all your monitoring system that you have get impacted. Your denominators get inflated or deflated because your inventory is going to increase. So you need to do everything correctly and how to manage the model life cycle. If it's all tier one, you have to triple your resources and so on.
For the budget, next year's budget, we are tripling the MRM team.
Exactly. I completely agree. It's a great question.
Perfect. So with that, I think we should kind of wrap up today's session. This was fascinating, and I'm so glad we were able to have this amazing discussion, Rafiq. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. So people online, we will be sharing these slides and also the video of today's session. If you have signed up for the Quant University list, you will get future invites to many of our sessions. And as I mentioned, next week, I'm going to share some of my thoughts on what I've been seeing over the last year or so with respect to generative AI, both teaching, this is the 5th graduate class in this year at Northeastern, many of the tooling, many of the things I've learned along the way, but also some of the projects we have done with other clients. So I'll try to summarize it in a 1-hour session, and hopefully you will be able to join us. And thank you for this amazing discussion, and all the participants online. Thank you for your questions and your discussion. And we will continue our discussion online. We will get back to LinkedIn and further exchange our thoughts. And again, as I mentioned, I'm very interested to kick off this, and we have a lot of like-minded thinkers to even involve with the discussion. If we could even put together as a Q2 goal of maybe having like a list of use cases which are commonly used in the financial industry and the rationale for tiering, even if we don't come up with the actual tiering, but the considerations for tiering to be thought of, that would even provide people guidance to say, okay, so we thought it was a tier one, but it's actually a tier two, and help further both the discipline, but also bring in that common best practice so that we can all kind of keep some sanity and don't have to reinvent the wheel again and again. With that said, we will continue the discussion, and thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care. See you. Bye-bye.